Matthew Wood. He's from San Diego, California. He went to Brown University. He's a Ron Brown Scholar. He majored in public health and Portuguese. Matt worked for Deloitte, but he also did a Fulbright in, I'm going to try this, Belo Horizonte area in Brazil.
Uh-huh.
Oh gosh. And then went on to be the regional coordinator for the Fulbright programs in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo and Minas Gerais.
Minas Gerais.
Oh
Yep.
gosh. So thanks, Matt, for being with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. Well, good afternoon to you all. For most people on the East Coast, about 3 o'clock. We're just a couple hours ahead of you all here in Brazil. I'm quite excited to give back and pass down some information. I know when I was in school still, I was very curious about post-college fellowships, scholarship programs, what I could do, and what are free ways that I could go abroad, right? So here's an opportunity for you all to learn a little bit more about Fulbright. Some of you know Fulbrighters personally, some people know the brand, some people may not know anything at all. That is all wonderful, and today we're going to be going through multiple facets about the program, why you should be interested in it, what type of programs there are, and what that process looks like. Depending on whether or not you're an underclass person, if you're an upper class person, or a recent graduate, there are programs for all of you, but that may change some of your timeline. So moving through the slide here, we can see this is our agenda. So I'm going to give a little bit more background on myself, how I came to become a Ron Brown Scholar and a Fulbright Scholar, a little bit of the history of the program, talking about the programs, defining your fit, which I think takes the heaviest emphasis, in the timeline. Timelines really creep up onto you for rising seniors or rising graduates. There are a lot of things going into your head, making sure that your credits are ready, that your major is set, and possibly finding an additional job, right? And so this can be an awesome complement to your post-college career, and I'm here to help you as much as possible. All right. So just a little bit about me. So as I said, I'm really from San Diego, California. I was raised in a lot of different states, but ended up in Providence, Rhode Island for school. I loved the liberal arts education there and tried to dabble in as much as possible. As Holly said, I majored in Portuguese and Brazilian studies, as well as public health. And my focuses ended up being within health disparities, racial theory, and international entrepreneurship. If you're taking a look at this photo here up to the front, this is the Black affinity group that we have at Fulbright Brazil. Recently, I've been spearheading a few diversity initiatives between the Latino with the Black, as well as LGBT affinity groups within Fulbright Latin America. As also Holly said, I am an employee of Deloitte. I am a consultant by trade. Ron Brown has a very long and positive relationship with Deloitte, so if you want to talk about possible consulting avenues, case studies, we can do that afterwards, or you can DM me personally. Deloitte was super, super kind enough to allow me to defer for my first Fulbright grant as well as for my second Fulbright grant. So I will be returning back to Washington, D.C., close to the Ron Brown Scholar office, and I'll be working within public education as well as healthcare consulting. So that's a little bit about me. So Fulbright history. The program was started in 1946 by Senator Fulbright. So this was someone who was trying to, during the World War era, to expand the program to reach the education of what it means in the United States and to foster better connections and relationships. This is a very testy time. I won't get into too much of the critical theory of what it means to be a Fulbrighter and the Fulbright experience, but it does come from a time where we are seen as one of a global power. And so this is one of the on-ground levels of kind of, we call it citizen diplomacy. You as a Fulbrighter will not be kind of an ambassador. You will be called what is called a cultural ambassador. So either through your research, through teaching English, through a master's program, you're going to be representing your narrative, your family, and to some degree the United States and the communities that you so choose. There are a lot of different players within the organization that makes Fulbright happen. So Fulbright operates out of the U.S. Department of State, Education and Cultural Affairs. They also have another organization called CIES. And then there's another organization that's called IIE. So this will be acronym soup for some of you, which is totally fine. There's a vocabulary page on their website, and as well, I'll try to do my best to make sure that everyone's clear about the vocabulary. However, just to know that there are a lot of organizations, but there's only one place that you need to apply. In general, this is a pretty straightforward process. For all of the history, we are in over 100 countries. This has been going over 50 years. Personally, I work with the Fulbright Commission in Brazil. I'm a regional coordinator for 3 states, meaning that I did 1 year of ETA-ship in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, where I previously studied abroad there as well. When I talked about my Latin American international studies, I studied abroad as much as possible during college. I went to Cuba, Ecuador, and Brazil. And so that's why I knew that I wanted to do something in Latin America. Not having any Latin heritage myself, just a curiosity and a passion. So there are programs all over the world in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Western Europe, as well as Latin America. And they have different competitive natures as well, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. So it is a long history. There's a lot to be said, but for right now, we'll say that it's a program sponsored by the government to help promote relationships between the US and other countries. Alrighty. So Fulbright history, which is a little bit more, there have been over 300,000 Fulbrights awarded across the globe, right? That's a pretty large amount. When you're talking about heads of states or government, there's 37 officers who are former Fulbrighters, 59 Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, MacArthur Fellows, and Presidential Medal of Freedom recipients. Meaning, you as a Fulbright participant are in very good company and have a very large and influential network to access. Whether that's within your country of choice or within the general Fulbright network, they are very serious about pushing you forward to making sure that you have lasting connections with each other and with the organization. After you become a Fulbright, so after your grant is done, you have access to a wide range of opportunities, either online like JSTOR, either with jobs at the Department of State, either connections with ambassadors at different countries. There's so many different ways that Fulbright can help you later in your career or professional development that I think it's worth at least looking to or at least apply. So as you can see, there's a lot of heavy hitters when it comes to Fulbrighters. Not to necessarily say that Fulbright itself is dictating that they're going to be successful. I think Fulbright itself is a great name, it is a great platform, but Fulbright is not going to make you the head of state or the head CEO of some organization. Fulbright is a way for you to explore yourself, to increase your emotional intelligence, and to network and engage with peers in local and global communities. At least that's from my perspective and through my 3 years here at the Fulbright organization. All right. So why Fulbright? Why you should apply, why you should go through the whole process of creating essays again and clouding your senior year, right? So I break it down to 3 main buckets. The consultants who like to do buckets. So the first one, as I just mentioned, is network opportunities. So that's on a global scale. You have direct access to certain jobs. They have something called a non-compete eligibility, which means that after completing Fulbright, you can get a kind of direct access or a direct interview for certain jobs. And there's different networks that you can access through LinkedIn and a variety of people there. Personal and professional growth. I honestly think this is one of the largest value adds as it gives you a time to reflect, right? You spent 4 years in an organization defined by your institution, right? Someone says, introduce yourself. You say, hi, my name is, I go to this school, right? What happens when you're no longer at that school? Who were you before you went to this prestigious university, and who are you going to be after it? What are your goals? What are your morals? And what are your principles? Fulbright is a beautiful time for you to explore that, to engage with communities, to work within the education or the private sector, to go to grad school. There are many ways that going abroad will increase your capacity to learn, to make goals, and connect with others. And so that translates well into global experience and perspective. So from a job market perspective, you are even more hireable, right? Because you have experiences, you know, you're adaptable, you have communication skills, and you have foreign language skills, but you'll also understand how society and business operates in different areas of the world. This is something that can stick with you for the rest of your life, something that you'll probably tell your kids. And I also want to make this gap and distinction between Fulbright and global experiences versus study abroad. I hope that you all have the opportunity to study abroad. Even if you haven't, I just want to make that parallel. Those are very different mindsets. When you're studying abroad, you're there for 12 to 15 weeks, right? You're trying to do the most you can, you're catching flights, you're drinking drinks. There's a difference when you're grounded in a community, when your goal is to contribute rather than just to receive as a student, right? So you're making longer lasting relationships, you understand your city and your area a little bit better. And so I want to say study abroad is a good lens to view Fulbright, but it is not a complete lens to view your Fulbright experience. It's probably going to surpass that. Also, your culture shock experiences as well as your integration experience is going to be very different because 3 months is a relatively short period of time. When you're there for, let's say, 9 months or 1 year, you're able to feel those growing pains. You feel homesickness. You feel whether it's a health issue. There are a variety of things that can happen within a year. So with all that said, I think the top 3 things to think about why to do a Fulbright is network opportunities, growth, and local perspectives and experiences. Okay. So programs. I will be mostly focusing today on U.S. student programs. What does it mean, U.S. student programs? Either a recent grad, so someone who's a senior, all the way to 0 to 5 years post-graduation. If you're in graduate school, you are also eligible. There are different programs for whether or not you're a master's student and specific programs, whether you're a doctoral student. They call them sandwich programs, but for now I'm going to focus on the recent graduates and college seniors. So breaking it down to the 3 categories again, we have ETA, English Teaching Assistant. So this is probably the most populous grant. They have the most awarded across the different countries. And this means that you are going to be teaching English to some degree or American Studies to some degree in a variety of settings. So this can mean in an elementary school, in a high school, or in a university. Particularly in my case in Brazil, we teach at public universities. And so this is something that was very attractive to me. I wanted to be able to work with college students. I wanted to work with someone who already had an intermediate understanding. That way we could approach more complex topics. For instance, last week we were talking about code switching, different modalities of teaching, as well as ability and disability, right? So that'd be very different teaching 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds. We were talking about different content. So in your search for different programs, I would look at what type of settings your program is designated for. Is it in a school? Is it in a community center? This is something to keep in mind. And that translates a little bit over to research. So if you're looking for something that's a little less structured or you're not feeling like English teaching is your thing, that's no problem whatsoever. Research means that you're going to have some type of guiding question or guiding project, maybe a continuation from your senior thesis, maybe something that you've always wanted to explore but never had time to. But this is your time to explore anything with the help of some type of institution. Meaning you can't just apply to a research grant without what we call a letter of intent or a letter of collaboration. So that means as a part of your research process, you're going to have to look at different organizations in your desired host country that would sponsor you or that would advise you, right? So most of us had an advisor in college. It's the same thing. You need some type of advisor that will say, I, blank, 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 at this university, blank, support and will advise you during this ET or this research grant period. So that is one component. Researchers tend to be a little bit older, a little bit more specific, whereas English teaching assistants seem to have more of a, it depends on what country you have, but research people seem to have a little bit more focus as to what their research is doing and how that's going to propel them in their academic or professional careers. Many people use the research grants to go into med school, into grad school, or to help them give a little bit of reflection on something that they already did. More often than this, research is less structured in terms of timelines. If you're someone that struggles in terms of filling their schedule, fears lost without large blocks of things, research may be a challenge for you, both good or maybe bad, depending on how you view it. Research, you're going to have to be a lot more independent. No one is going to tell you what to do or when to do it. In comparison to an ETA shift, you're going to have a certain amount of hours that you're going to need in a classroom or a community setting, and that's going to fill your time, right? So you're going to have a lot more structure. You also have a lot more community between the different ETAs. In the ETAs, you're going to have codes, meaning that you're going to work with other teachers from the United States and other teachers within your host country. In research, it could be a little bit more independent, but depending on your research topics, let's say it's more community focused, music or dance, you'll be working with peers within that community. So just a few things in mind when we're thinking what type of grant that we want. And also, at any time, if you have any questions, just let me know, and we can touch on these questions at the end as well. So the third category we have here are masters and special programs. This is the bucket that's changed the most over the years, and Holly can attest to this. So a few of them off the top of my head, we have the Nat Geo, so National Geographic, and the Critical Language Scholarship as well, meaning that there are certain countries that will give you extended funding or special funding, depending on the topic that you're pursuing or the language that you're going to be using in country. Off the top of my head, I know this applies to Turkish, Hindi, Arabic, Chinese, Korean, and a few other non-Western countries, non-Western languages, where they'll give you more funding to help learn the language so that your time can be better utilized once you hit the ground running, right? Kind of like a pre-orientation program if you've ever done one of those, right? Gets you primed up and ready to go in the beginning. Some of the other master's programs, so some people want a free master's. You can definitely do with that at Marble Fulbright, but just know that a free master's program is definitely going to be more competitive. There are a few of them off the top of my head. In Mexico, they have a business degree. They have those in Spain, in Germany, as well in the UK. They have some of them, I believe, at Cambridge University or Oxford, and those are some of the most competitive programs in the world of Fulbright. We'll be talking about competitiveness and where you can find the statistics a little bit later, but just know that there are a variety of programs that are a little bit more niche to certain countries, but the general broad ones are research and the ETA chip. Okay, so there's no right or wrong program for you. You're just going to have to reflect on what is going to be the best fit for you and how much you're willing to do to go for it. All right. Okay, moving on to competitiveness. So on this website, and after you all will have full access to this deck, so fulbright.org/statistics. You guys do not have a notion of how much time I've spent on this website during my pre-process, but this is gold, right? So per country, every country in the world that Fulbright has a program, they have at least 3 years worth of data that shows you for which program how competitive it is. So more often than not, year-to-year awards will stay the same, depending on, let's say, if there's a political tension, a natural disaster, or a lack of funding. Those are 3 of the most common reasons for grants to change their numbers, but more often than not, the numbers stay the same. So let's just use an example here. So we have Spain, which is one of the largest grant awardees here in at least Western Hemisphere. And so they, for 2017, they have 92 applications and around 24 awards, right? So this means around 20% acceptance rate. So who are those 20%? You don't want to get bogged down to the, hey, this one is 20% versus 30%, I should apply to this one. You should apply to things where you have the best fit, where your narrative is most parallel to this award, and that fits the program's needs. Some of them will explicitly state that they want people with, let's say, a TOEFL experience, or that they have a STEM background because they'll be at a STEM university. So for regardless of your academic background, there's going to be a program for you, but that may or may not match up with, let's say, your desired country, right? So you're going to have to give the best angle and the best story so that you can be competitive at the program of your choice. Okay, so I'd say this is a great website to go through. And if you have any questions about statistics, just let me know, but it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. Okay, finding your fit. So there are a variety of things that you consider when you're talking about a Fulbright and what a Fulbright you should be applying to, right? So one of the first things that they're going to tell you if you went to an official Fulbright workshop would be, what is your academic and professional background? So you studied East Asian studies and you want to go to East Asia to do your Fulbright. Wonderful. What about if you studied from something completely different, but you always want to go to this country, right? Wonderful. But your background is not necessarily going to be the thing that's going to root for you. That's when you translate into your interests and your narratives. Everybody remembers the time where they had to put their whole life into 500 words for the college application. So it's a little bit like this again. So this time you're going to have a personal statement and a statement of purpose. And these are the areas and these are the papers where you're going to be able to express yourself as colorfully as possible, why you are the most competitive or why you should be a part of this cohort, okay? We'll talk about the actual application process in a few slides, but I'm just going to go over more about the thing. Language ability. So you can either do this by heritage, something you've learned in school, something you've learned at Duolingo, was at a STEM. You're going to want to be able to tell why your language abilities are a good fit for the program. For certain programs, you're going to have to take a language exam or a proficiency test. That means you're going to have to go to, let's say, a heritage speaker or a professor that you've taken with, and they're going to have to give a diagnostic about your language abilities. So we can talk about that a little bit more, so it's nothing to be scared of, but they just want some type of quantification of how well you speak a certain language. Moving on, we have program preferences, right? So I mentioned, so some universities, they're STEM, so they're going to prefer engineers. Some people want experienced TOEFL. Some people want people who have never taught English before. That will be all listed on your specific country's profile. So all that information is clear and easy to read. Program competitiveness, we just listed that. So sometimes there might be one that has a lot more grants, and there's sometimes that will have very few. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be more or less competitive to that specific program, right? So there might be a few slots where you might be a great fit to that program and they were just looking for you. So don't take this factor too seriously in your process. grant timeline, logistics. This is a very large factor depending on where in the world your program is. I will use my case to be I statements. In Brazil, in the Southern Hemisphere, we operate on a different semester system, meaning that my semester starts in February and March. So I applied to Fulbright for the first time in October 2016. I found out that I was a scholar in March of 2017, my graduate year of Brown University, and I did not start my grant till February 2018. That is an extremely long timeline, and I had to prepare it accordingly so that I had funds, that had a job in between, and that there were a lot of kind of questionable factors, right? So Fulbright could be something that's a really great kind of icing on the cake, but at the same time, it's a very confusing thing. So let's say that your job offer, let's say you're going through official recruiting on campus, or that you're currently at a job, and they're making you decide to sign a contract without you knowing if you got Fulbright or not. That is a very serious situation that happens, and something that you're going to need to take in consideration with your general professional interests and goals, right? And then lastly, political climate and identity. Particularly in the Middle East, there have been some programs, Turkey most recently, that have been canceled or suspended due to political climate. So there are some that are very tranquil, but they don't want to put ETAs in there. So I believe there was one in Honduras that they took people out of. So just look to the general safety of your program to see if it would be a good fit as well as identity. Being Black, being LGBT, being a woman in various countries is going to raise very different questions and varying experiences. I would say this is another area where you should invest significantly in how you feel comfortable adapting to a strange environment. Is it something that you've been conditioned before? Is it a challenge you're willing to do? A year is a long time, right? So going a year without your hair products, someone that you trust to braid your hair, someone you trust for your skin products, there are so many different things you have to consider. Are there going to be coworkers that share my identities? I've been very lucky within Brazil. I consider Brazil a Black country, has some of the most Afro-descendant people outside of Nigeria. But at the same time, there's a lot of systemic and implicit racism in this country and policing that goes according to it, right? So I did my research to reach out to some people that could speak about their experience. I'll show you some resources about that later, but just keep in mind that countries are going to have varying different levels, especially within the country if it's an urban or non-urban setting. So lots of factors. I know we're talking a lot of things right now, but just want to give you a scope of what are the things you should be thinking about in your early process. All right. Application timeline. I would say organization is essential here, right? Because beginning of senior year, it gets messy. If you're already graduated, life happens. You want to give yourself as much time as possible. Say you need to change anything, you need to redo essays, your professional recommendations aren't coming in. These are all common pitfalls, right? So I'm going to say, let's say I am a rising senior in college. This also applies to anyone who's in college now or is a recent graduate. This is the general timing that we have for the US student programs. So we have now, we just started our program, webinar. We're very interested. Here I'm going to start conducting my research. We're going to try to find the best fit. I'm going to make a ranking list, right? So I created a Google Doc and I created, let's say, 10 cities that I think would be really great to study in. Breaking that down into maybe 5 programs I want to apply to, and what are maybe my 2 priority ones that I want to talk to my peers about and do my extensive research about to make sure that I made the right choice. You're going to want to notify your professors about your intent to apply. Depending on your program, you're going to need 2 to 3 recommendations. And for a college student at a large university, this might be a large ask, right? Or even at a small university, you don't talk to professors that often, so you want to help them out, right? Say, hey, I think of applying a Fulbright. Do you have any experience with this? Would you feel comfortable writing a letter of recommendation for me? Once you get to that point, you don't want to just leave them dry. The people who write the best recommendation are primes, meaning that you as a recommendee can write an outline for them. You can tell them why you're writing the application. You can even show them your essay, and you can write different things that you prove to them in class that you think would be well for a recommendation. I call this kind of like, I forget the word for it, but you can almost write the recommendation for them. You can't obviously do that, but you can help them as much as possible so you're not feeling like this recommendation is written in the dark. As with most things, you want to give them a notice period. I recommend at least 3 weeks minimum, but I've had a lot more comfortability doing this a couple months ahead of time, just in case, let's say they're going research. My professors like to travel a lot. If they're out with Wi-Fi, you don't want to get an anxiety spell just because they didn't reach that deadline, okay? And then lastly, in program research, FPA. FPA stands for Fulbright Program Advisor. So some of you all who have a scholarship office or a fellowship office, they will be under that category. And sometimes this is just a professor who has already done Fulbright and is willing to share information. So depending on university, and this is very case specific, you might have an internal process to apply to before you can apply to the general Fulbright program. So there are a few ways that we can go about this. So some of your schools are going to ask for almost do an approval process, meaning especially for research proposals, which is different from ETA, they're going to want to make sure that you have a clear idea. And so if they don't approve you, there might be a less likelihood that you will be able to get the Fulbright grant. A lot of this has to do with some academic politics and keeping their brand as a university, right? So you're going to do the most of your ability to make sure that the people in your scholarship office are approving of your application and they think that's strong, right? So I would Google, they have it on the Fulbright website. You just type in university and you can see who your Fulbright advisor is. All right, so moving on into the application period, you're going to want to find an application buddy. Fulbright is a tense thing to apply to. You might be applying to Princeton in Africa, Princeton in Latin America, Marshall Scholarship, right? This is a lot of things happening at the same time. There's no reason that you have to do it alone. So I found a couple buddies. We created an SI working group. We provided feedback for each other and we provided motivation. It sounds silly, but to be honest, this can seem a very stressful process if you're putting a lot of energy into it, and having someone who can be there along the way for you can help greatly. This can be someone who already has gotten a Fulbright or just a best friend. You can choose, right? And then most importantly, creating backups. As much as I think all of you all can get a Fulbright, and I'll do my best in my ability to make sure that happens, it's good in life to have a few backups, right? So that can be a backup fellowship program, it could be a job, it could be grad school. But I just want everyone to know that depending on your timeline, these things might be able to cancel out or may not work well with each other, right? So I was thankful that I had already known that a consulting job at a large organization was going to allow me to defer, right? But there are some organizations, especially startups or smaller places, that won't allow you to defer. So figure out what are your priorities, and I created scenarios. So in a scenario A, this is how I proceed. In scenario B, this is how I also proceed, right? So you don't feel too stressed in a situation when they're making you decide with the deadline, all right? And then lastly here, applying at large or through an on-campus path. So let's say you are a recent graduate. You graduated from Emory, Harvard, whatever, university, and you are 2 years out of college. However, you still want to do a Fulbright. Wonderful, you can still do that, but you have to decide whether or not you want to apply either on campus, once again, which is going to have an earlier deadline. You're going to have to speak with your Fulbright Program Advisor, FPA, or at large, meaning that you don't kind of get this on-campus sponsorship. So they have rarely research and answers regarding if you are less competitive if you apply at large. However, there's nothing that can be explicitly confirmed about that. I would say work with the resources you can. If you still have a positive relationship with your professors and your university, I would say go with your campus path. If you think it would be too much logistical effort to do that and would apply at large, no problem there. Just make sure that you have all your resources in a row because you're not going to be receiving reminders. For people that are coming from a few years of experience, you don't have to use just professors. You can use someone that you've worked with, you can use a boss. I think you can also use a peer depending on the situation. There's an internship program in Mexico that I know explicitly asks for a business recommendation. So depending on your program, you're going to need different advisors. All right. October 8th, 2019 is the official Fulbright deadline. Please, please, please do not wait till the end of that date because this program and that platform is known to fail, and they've been not so nice with people who have not turned in their applications on time. What a shame would that be to do all this effort to have to wait another year and a half to do that. And then in March and April, you are given your award notification, whether that means you're a finalist, awardee, or waitlist. There are a variety of things that can come out of that, but just know that this is more or less the timeline. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, just write those down because we can definitely refer back to this. Okay, and then lastly, we have the resources, right? So we have blogs. I think this is one of the most helpful things for me. What is the day-to-day, right? What is the emotional experience? What does it feel to live in that community? So not all locations are going to have blogs, but you can just type in, let's say I want to go to Spain, Fulbright Spain at Tumblr or blogspot.org or whatever you do that, right? So find keywords that work for you and explore some of the literature that they have there. Of course, you have a program advisor and professors. You have Ron Brown Scholars. I am by far not the only Fulbright scholar within the Ron Brown network. There I know I have a close friend who did in Columbia, and there are a few other scholars as well. So you have a variety of experiences if you want to hear some more narratives. Fulbright Instagrams. So you have the Fulbright Instagrams at large, you have the Fulbright Instagrams from your countries, as well you have a new Fulbright Instagram that's for Black Fulbrighters, Fulbright Noir, as well as for LGBT Fulbrighters, Fulbright Prism. So they're both trying to collect resources on those specific identities regarding their Fulbright experience. And then lastly, we have links about tutorials, about applications. You have official events, so they make official events at conferences, as well as Fulbright alumni ambassadors, which are paid Fulbright scholars who are given there to about their speeches, about their experiences, and answer questions. So those are all the people that are at your disposal. Okay, so I've done a good amount of talking here. So I want to stay quiet and then open the floor to any questions that any of the attendees may have.
Thanks, Matt. That was terrific. Okay, so for those of you who are on the call, we're going to open it up to questions now. There's two ways to ask questions. You can either type the question into your chat box and I will read it out loud. If you don't want me to say your name, you can just type in the word private, or you can hit the little hand icon on your screen and I'll take you off mute and you can ask your question out loud, but we'll all be able to hear it. So there's two questions on the board waiting for you, Matt. One is about the timeline you presented. That's general, correct? That's not specific to Brown.
Correct. So the October 8th deadline is Fulbright broad. Whatever campus you're coming from, every person applying to Fulbright needs to get their application in by October 8th. What I put for my specific university is mid-September for the on-campus deadline. That will vary. Sometimes I've seen that be in August, September, or early October. So I would check in with your specific university when that is, or if you're applying at large, you will most likely not have to go through that process.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question, Cameron. So the next question is, with regards to the recommenders, does the status of your recommender matter? Like, for example, if you could ask the chair of the department who might be well regarded and have lots of publications, but the TA knows you better, do you think that's going to matter in the Fulbright process?
I would say content over status 9 times out of 10. If that professor, you know, is also a Fulbright scholar, that would be a nice thing to add. But I would say, especially for people at large universities, someone who's going to know you better, speak to your abilities, and be able to work with you. A lot of times when you're asking professors of higher stature, they create very cookie cutter recommendations. And so people who have more time and have more relationship are less likely to do so. So I would invest in people and recommenders that will create the highest quality. And you can ask them. I would say, I know sometimes it's hard to ask blunt questions professors. Be like, hey, how do you think you would feel about writing this application? Do you feel like you know enough about me? Ask very blunt questions, right? Because if this is your future, why not kind of take the time to make sure that the people writing recommendations are going to give you ones of quality.
Yeah, I totally agree. I always recommend just ask someone, do you feel like you can write a strong recommendation for me? Because they'll tell you, and it's better to know. I like that. So, and I just want to pause here and say that if there are people still on the line who have to hang up because you have to run off to class or you've got to go study, you are not going to hurt our feelings. If you hang up, it is fine. We're going to just keep answering questions. So this one's from Sojourner, and she asks, if you are applying as a recent grad, do you still apply through your academic institution, your undergrad that you just graduated from?
So you have options. So you can either apply to that academic process. You would have to go through your FPA and your on-campus deadline, or you can go at large. So that decision is up to you. I would say within 1 to 2 years, I would still recommend going to your campus. But if a few years out, it really does not matter which path you go through.
Great. Thank you, Sojourner. And this is from Chinwei. This is about languages. Do you need the host country's language proficiency for any of the Fulbright programs or just for the academic program?
Sorry, can you repeat that last part?
Mhm.
Just for the what and just for the
Do
academic?
you need the country's language proficiency for any Fulbright program or just for the academic program?
So that varies. That varies. So even within, we'll talk about ETA, the English teaching experience. There will be some countries that will require intermediate or advanced. There will be some countries that will do zero, and they will train you in that language. I'll take that for Korean, for instance. They will train you in Korean. But there are some programs we're talking about research or other ones where they will feel like you need that language to hit the ground running. So I would say look at your specific countries that you're looking at for those different language requirements. Those will all be stated explicitly.
Yeah. And I can say that when I was on the Fulbright interviewing committee at Duke, Um, I can remember we were specifically interviewing for Germany, and it was kind of a middle of the road thing. Like they wanted you to know a little, and they did make the candidates speak a little bit of German in their interviews, but it wasn't more, they didn't expect you to do scientific research in German. So I do
Mm.
remember that. So it sounds like it's just case by case. Um,
Mm. So just one more aspect on that. Sometimes they won't actually ask you for a specific language. They might ask you for a language family. I know recently there's some Latin Americans who would say if you have a romance base that you can, let's say 2 years of a romance language that can work. So sometimes there are fungible language abilities as well.
oh, great. Cameron wants to know, let's see. She says, I know the GPA requirement is a 3.0, at least at her school, but how much of a role does that play in the application process? Is it a holistic process considering experiences and the whole package, or is there a very strong emphasis on GPA and like test scores?
I would say very holistic. I also think this is very interesting because certain countries evaluate in general academics very differently. Some are only GPA and some are non, like have nothing to do with GPA. So I think that influences. Going back to how these decisions are made, we first apply to the US and then that gets transferred over to your country specific commission. So it's a very collaborative process. So there are different cultural influences within their application review. But I would say overall, it's just, we'll call them the medium competitive, let's say, applications, depending on statistics. I think those are a lot more holistic. Let's say for the ones that are free masters or at Oxford or getting an MBA or with very small numbers, those definitely skew towards higher GPAs for sure.
Thank you. Caroline wants to know if there's an age limit to apply like there is with the Rhodes Scholarship.
No, there's not an explicit one. They will say, they might call it a young grad or recent student. That phrase is very flexible. I would say the program caters to 0 to 4 years after graduation. But just in my cohort, I have people that are turning 30 currently right now, so it is 8 years after graduation. If you are a more experienced person, there are other programs out there specific to your specific industry, especially there are a lot more at grad school and the PhD programs. So if you're not too interested in right now or you think you want to do it later, there are definitely a significant amount of programs that apply to different age and academic groups, but there is not, to my knowledge, a specific age cutoff.
Another question about being a graduate, having already graduated. So, Sojourner asks if you're a recent grad, oh, hold on, and you're not on campus anymore, you've moved away, how do you complete the language proficiency test?
So you can do that with a heritage speaker. You can go to a local like language school. It's a very flexible thing. They're not gonna like look at someone's LinkedIn resume, but there's gonna be some type of proof that this is a very proficient speaker or a native speaker, and then they're gonna evaluate you. That is given. You can print out that form. Applications have been open since April 1st, so you can actually go through all of these forms and see what it asks in terms of for your specific language proficiency test.
Another recent grad question. So if you, let's say you're in grad school and the institution that you're in now does not have a Fulbright, advisor, or maybe they don't have a strong fellowship office, do you think it's
Mhm.
better that they should apply through their undergraduate college or at large?
That's a good question. So I would say I do not have too much experience with choosing between institutions. I would say choose the one where you feel most supported or you have more access. So where that sounded like the undergraduate, you would not be stigmatized for applying through one university in comparison to another. So don't feel like there will be some type of negative influence with that. I would say evaluate what your timeline looks like. Do you have time to travel? Often, as I said, if you're applying through your campus pathway, they're going to make you do a small interview on campus. And so if you're across the world or or you're just really busy and an on-campus interview does not seem very feasible, then I would keep that in mind with who I would want to apply through.
Awesome. So Jacqueline is asking, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jacqueline, but I think maybe you're also asking about which way you would gain an advantage in this, but she's asking, how do you choose between two programs? Should you go with the one that you're passionate about or the one you have the most experience in?
Ooh, that's interesting that there's a
Yeah,
divergence between
that's a good
experience and
question.
passion. um, that's a good reflection. I would say the way I was trained is that the graders and the evaluators for this Fulbright program, so they hire a third party, which is the IIE program, and these are like PhD and education folk who have a very good eye for authenticity. And so I know we talk about this word a lot, or being your more, was it fullest self, but how that comes off in essays and your interviews is going to really make the difference, right? So if you're not as experienced, but that passion is there, then write about it, right? Because if you are just doing it because your resume fits, but the passion is lacking, I feel like that's going to be kind of a couple points deducted. But I would say there is not kind of a strict formula for who's going to get in where, right? So just some of the most competitive programs, those are people that are going to have experiences. But what I'm going to focus and give the best advice is how you can spin your narrative so you sound like the most competent person that you can be, right? So even if your experience is different, what are the core skill sets, perspectives, and frameworks that you can apply, right? So, okay, let's say you're doing STEM and you want to go to the humanities in whatever country. You can talk about analytical thinking and writing and communication, right? So all these different things that you can translate over. So if you want to take a step back, you know, get on a whiteboard, get on a piece of paper. What are attributes? What are my strong attributes? Maybe what are things I want to improve on? What are the experiences I've had? And then how many of that can I fit into like a one pager that will feel authentic, cohesive, and effective, right? So that's my advice is so take a step back and figure out what are your attributes and how that can translate to be a part of a strong narrative to the country of your choice. And at the end of the day, if you're really stuck, make a pros and cons list or ask people, right? I know some people who made applications on the whim who I would not recommend that route, but they have still got it. And some people who really struggle to decide between programs. And so I would say that's somewhat of a good problem, right? There's so many things to choose from, but at some day you're going to have to choose and then really go for it and do your research, right? Because you do have limited time. Just one question that raises, you can apply multiple times to a Fulbright to be a Fulbrighter, but not at the same time. So let's say you got rejected from Spain, but you want to go to Portugal. You can write that as well. No problems, you will not be stigmatized. You can also, in very rare cases, apply to one program and be snatched up by another program. This happened in the case in Latin America. Brazil snatched up people from Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina. So there's a ranking system. So what happens, and that depends on your country. So your application will be given a ranking of, let's say, a letter or a number, and that goes into a general list. And then that commission goes and chooses, I want this amount of people. But let's say that you're number 10 on one list, but a little bit lower on another list. Let's say they can grab you and be a part of a different country. So that gets a little in the weeds, but it's just a possibility. I want to let you know. Does that answer your question?
Jerry is asking, is the fellowship an opportunity to continue language learning as well? I guess you're
Mm-hmm.
asking Jerry if they're going to teach you the language once you get there.
So unfortunately, I'm a broken record when I say it depends, right? So there's a specific amount of countries where they'll fly you out and you're allowed to be there for 2 to 6 months. That's a critical language fellowship before. And then there's certain in-country programs. So I know at the universities here, they have Portuguese for foreigners if you want to take that. They have a variety of ways to support you. Sometimes your mentors or regional coordinator in my role will help you with, say, online resources. They can give you a little study program, or they might be on you. So that depends on your country, right? Or how hard of a language it is. If it's a non-Western language, right, it might be a little harder to access certain materials where you are now. I would also do your best now. If you're in a college environment, please utilize all the resources at your disposal, right? Make this kind of like your entryway into your Fulbright experience if you don't feel quite prepared now.
Sojourner asks, if there is a location that only accepts doctoral candidates, is there another way to study in that country through a different Fulbright program?
I feel like that's a very specific question that I might have to follow up with. I would say that translates into the different graduate programs. And so my general question is you have to look at that specific country. Can you possibly ask if she has or he has a country in mind when with that
Hey,
question?
yeah. Let me see if she's still in the room. Yeah, Sojourner, just if you go back in and let us know what country you're thinking specifically about, and we'll circle back with you. Um,
But
while you're
overall,
doing,
yeah,
um, of course, she has answered, and it is a country that I am embarrassed that I cannot pronounce. Cote
spell it out.
d'Ivory,
Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire.
COTED apostrophe IVOIRE.
Wow.
What's that?
Yes. So that's a francophone country. I'll have to follow up with that because I know that's a program that has had issues with kind of political instability, but they also have some other research programs. But my first suggestion would go to Cote d'Ivoire at Fulbright slash at find the slash there, and then see what programs as well. Some of the countries that are a little bit iffy, I would reach out to the country coordinator as well to see if there's any security about that program being renewed, right? So if you have any doubt about your program is going to remain, if you're looking at the statistics, if it goes grant, 2 years without grant, I would follow up because I would be really ashamed to also apply to a program that would actually not have a fellowship during your designated time.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Cameron's asking, is it possible to apply to the Fulbright as a junior, considering the time difference between the application and actually entering the program?
Unfortunately, no, and that's what stinks. So, especially I will say Southern Hemisphere, you basically will be left with either 6 months, 3 months, or 8 months that you have to figure out if you're going to stay home and watch Netflix or find a real job or go traveling, right? So they make it so you have to be in your final year of college. So that means you would be applying your fall of your senior year. If you are a 0.5er, that's what we call them, or a semester, what's it called? Like you're graduating a different semester off, then I think there are exceptions, but that's case by case as well.
So when you're in that situation, I'm just following up myself. So when you're in that situation, you're kind of you're in a funny place as a senior where you're trying not to commit to anything that's going to prevent you from accepting your Fulbright, but you're waiting for your Fulbright until, later in the year, correct? Oh, can you guys hear me? Hey, Matt, can you hear me? What happened?
Sorry, my audio went out for a moment.
That's okay.
Can you repeat what that was?
Okay, I was asking, so so for some programs and you're a senior, you're in a holding pattern, right? Like you're not accepting other offers because you're sort of waiting to see if Fulbright pans out.
Right. So this is
Yeah.
where the planning and the backups happen, right? Because you can work your way out where you can knock them all out. You can have a deferral and then do the grant and then have a job. That's optimal. I would say more often than not, it does not go like that. And I will be very honest that sometimes, depending on your timeline, it can be a little hard to do a job search out of a country, right? So I do my best to support my ETAs and my grantees to start their job searching process earlier on to leverage the Fulbright name, right? So it's definitely doable, but it takes time and planning. So that's why I think these summers or these months leading up are perfect time to think about what is your 1 year plan, let's say your 3 year plan and your 5 year plan,
Yeah.
right? So having those things kind of somewhat planned out, you can always make those changes. But I would say having that in mind will help you figure out if Fulbright is the best kind of
Yeah.
complement to it.
That's such good advice. I think also in the fellowship office at your school, they can probably talk, not that I would recommend applying to something just because it can be deferred, but there are some programs that can be pretty easily deferred, like law school and Teach for America. And there's just
Mhm.
some other things that have like deferrals really common, so you can go do a Fulbright or whatever. So that would be a good thing to talk to your fellowship office about. Um, yeah, so Caroline's asking me if we can get a list of, if we can find application buddies, I suppose, with other Ron Brown students, and yes, we can. So when I post this recording, I'll do some follow-up posts on LinkedIn and Facebook and with the people who registered for this, and just kind of uh, we'll figure out a way to put people together if they want to be application buddies through Ron Brown, definitely. Um, Caroline also asks for you, Matt, what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid in the application?
Mm. And so you're going to hear a lot of advice about this. So I would already just, if I'm going to prepare you all, and I think this is another factor, is taking a step back, be mindful of who you're taking advice and editing and suggesting from, right? Do they have experience with this? Do you think they're an outlier? Do you think they're overconfident in their knowledgeability, right? I've worked with some Fulbright program advisors who I did not necessarily agree um, with their advice for the application component. But I would say make the differentiation between what you think a college application essay is and a Fulbright personal statement. For some of us who are using the adversity card, be mindful of extent, right? Because also different cultures view essays differently. That's not to say you have to figure out what it means to write an application in Chinese or Polish, right? But just be mindful this isn't necessarily a place for a sob story, but adversity is a good compliment. I would say sell yourself, but make sure that you can back it up, right? Don't be caught saying you're fluent in the language and then they interview you and you were fluent when you were 3 years old, but not now, right? So keep your things honest. Um, and then ask your friends and your close ones if you're doing yourself justice. There are some people I know that in line with their humility values that they don't want to overshare themselves. Make sure that you're doing a sanity check, that you're not selling yourself short, because there are a lot of people, especially a lot of your more privileged, white, more counterparts, that their parents did Fulbrighters or they're not coming from a first gen background, right? My mom to this day still doesn't know what Fulbright really is. And so I don't, right? So like, I don't have that ability to talk to my family about this application process. So figure out who you want to talk to, how your identities fit into this, right? And also, I would say maybe there are some identities for certain programs that it might be a risk to tell about, right? There are some very conservative places where maybe coming out as LGBT is not the safest thing to do. So I'd say go back to your research about what are the cultural values and how do I play into that general environment, okay?
Excellent. Jacqueline has a question about about the chances of an alternate becoming a finalist. So, like, what are the chances of an alternate becoming a finalist? And she's thinking specifically about Israel and the United Kingdom.
Off the top of my head, I would say United Kingdom very, very low. Israel a little bit more so, but still pretty low. Western, I'm not sure exactly sure how Israel is categorized, if it's in the Middle East or Western Europe, but at least in the Fulbright standing geographically. That I would not bank on being an alternate converting, and I would also say don't make that your mentality. Even if those statistics are looking very stark, go in hungry, right? Go in shooting for the stars, and then maybe that you get the alternative, great. Maybe you get snatched up by a different country, but don't go in shooting for being an alternative. I would say, as Ron Brown scholars, captains, we don't need to be thinking like that, and you have a team and family here supporting you to reach for the higher stuff.
Awesome. Chinwei asks, and I'm going to see, it's 4:57, and I'm going to have to run here in a few minutes, so we'll do a few more questions.
Mhm.
Chinwei is
Also, I
asking,
have.
oh yeah, show that.
Yes, yes. Just so you know, if you need to leave, that's my contact information and my WhatsApp if you need any questions. The more specific, preferred, please.
Fabulous. Let's do two more questions. This is a good one. So Chinwei's asking, are there any experiences or like, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, Chinwei, but like characteristics, personality characteristics, or
Mhm.
otherwise that Fulbright recipients tend to share, or is it a mixed bag? I'm thinking like, like with Google, they always talk about being googly.
Googlers. Uh-huh,
Is that a
uh-huh.
thing
Great
with
question.
Fulbright?
Yes, it really is. It really is. I would say there's a couple, if we're going to do like Mean Girls sitting at the table style,
Mm-hmm.
there's a good 20 to 25% of people that I had not previously interacted with. I would call them the DC crew, that are people who are looking for Department of State, that want to be in the Foreign Service. Then there's kind of a Peace Corps crowd. There's who are a little bit more for a cause, will be humanitarian, maybe a little savioristic. There's another 20 to 25% that's like that person that you see at the hostel playing guitar, who really just wants to be a little kumbaya. And then there's a good about 30% of just awesome dynamic people that you can't categorize. So that's kind of my stereotype of Fulbrighters. I would say that's also very region specific and program specific. The researchers tend to be a lot more academic, maybe a little bit more skewing to the introversion side. I would say they maybe be a little, no, I wouldn't say skewed, pretty balanced for ETAs, but I would say those you have more educators there and more people who are doing more cultural immersion. Mm-hmm.
Love it. Um, and then I'm going to do one more question. And this one, there's some like kind of specific ones on the board. So if you guys want to reach out to Matt with your specific questions, that would be great. But I'm going to end with this one from Peter. So Peter says, um, this is a two-parter. Um, what are some things that you would recommend really highlighting in the application? And then will you, Matt, speak about your own like personal motivation for applying to the Fulbright and what have you learned through your role as an advisor?
Ooh, lots of content there.
I know.
Go
Take
to
your time.
application, and I just realized I did kind of surpass like what I've been doing in Brazil. But thank you for that reminder. So application, I would say highlight adaptability, communication, your ability to make goals, your ability to recognize your mistakes, experiences that you've had where you've encountered challenges or you've traveled abroad, right? So if you've never left your state before, you better make a case that you know how to go in on an international plane and make the thing happen, right?
Mhm.
Also, why this country and not this other country, right? For some that have more parallels or that have larger numbers, they're going to be scanning for someone who's looking for just an easy Fulbright, right? So making sure that the narrative is parallel and it fits the program needs and comments. So if you're quoting somebody, if you're quoting a cultural thing, right, show that you've done your research, that you've reflected on yourself, and that you show that you're going to be adaptable and effective, and that you're going to bring that knowledge with you and when you're coming back to the United States as well, right? Because a part of the Fulbright experience is creating great relationships abroad, but also bringing that knowledge back to the US. Personally, moving on to that second question, I've loved my perspective going from a scholar now to an advisor. I now organize a group of 10 to 12 Fulbrighters, and so I get to travel to different universities. I manage, I do logistical things, I set goals. So I've grown as a manager and as a consultant. As a Fulbright in general, I've had access to people and spaces. I went to a very privileged school, right? So I had an amazing time coming from a first-gen low SES background to Brown. That was a big shock. But Fulbright was a more shocking in terms of political and the way governments work, right? So being able to meet the ambassador to Brazil, to speak at 4th of July events, to work, to speak to people at Facebook Brazil, or even the community things, right? So I work within, so we have different social stratas here, but I work within the comunidade, or which would be the projects in Brazil. So I work with education here, with public school teachers. We talk about empathy and language. I've grown immensely from my peers, from the people I teach, right? So I teach college students, so I know what it feels like to be in their shoes. And it's giving me my time, right? So sometimes the US can be intense. It's giving me time to figure out what does it mean to be American from the Americas, right? So understanding who we are in the grand scheme of things, how and why I'm attracted to mission-driven organizations and roles. I want to have impact, right? So I know that we operated within capitalism. That does not mean that we can't have social good along the way. And I know that I'm going to be a stronger analyst or employee when I come back to the United States next year. I don't have any regrets about this experience. I applied to Brazil knowing that I would be building off of a prior kind of knowledge base because I knew the language and I studied a little bit. But I was also very interested in South Africa and India and a variety of places, and I know that that would have been just as challenging and a positive experience, but just a different flavor. So just know that you can't go wrong with Fulbright. I think it is an amazing next step after college, whether or not you want the social validation externally or your intrinsic value to grow and to learn. I think it's something that it will stick with you and that you have so many resources at your disposal, including myself, Holly, the whole group, the other Ron Brown scholars. So don't feel like you are not prepared and never feel like you're not enough. Fulbright is a great brand, and what it does, it excludes people by self-selection, people not believing that they're enough to become a Fulbrighter. And so what my job is to do is to expel that, and that I want to see every one of your faces and names in that application thing. Okay? So with
Okay.
that, I think I want to say thank you to everyone for listening to my long-winded answers. You have my contact information, and thank you so much, Holly, for facilitating this webinar.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it. That's it, everyone. If we'll leave this up for a few more minutes so you can jot down the information. Feel free to reach out to me. If you have any questions, hduke@ronbrown.org. We'll definitely get something out about application buddies. And that's it. Take care, everyone. Have a great night.
Lovely. Ciao,
All right.
ciao.
Bye, Matt.